A ranger coal walker lies unconscious in the remote wilderness after a terrible fall. Suddenly a herd of wild mustangs appears and surrounds his motionless body. What these majestic creatures did next has experts baffled and will change everything you thought you knew about the bond between humans and wild animals. This extraordinary true story reveals how in our most vulnerable moments help can come from the most unexpected sources. The rugged mountains of Nevada's high rock canyon wilderness stretched endlessly under the scorching August sun. The landscape was a mesmerizing tapestry of rust-cold rock formations, sparse juniper trees, and golden grasslands that swayed gently in the hot desert breeze. This remote corner of the American West remained one of the few places where wild horses still roamed freely, much as they had for hundreds of years. Jason Meadows, a 34-year-old ranger coal walker with the Bureau of Land Management, had been patrolling this territory for nearly 8 years, with his weathered face, sun-bleached brown hair usually hidden beneath his wide-brimmed ranger hat, and lean muscular build honed by years of wilderness work. Jason embodied the modern-day frontiersman. The fine lines around his blue eyes spoke of long days spent squinting in the Nevada sun. Today's patrol was routine checking water sources, documenting wildlife sightings, and keeping an eye out for signs of poachers or illegal activities that occasionally plagued these protected lands. Jason had ventured farther than usual following reports from local ranchers about a particularly elusive band of mustangs that had been spotted in the area. This herd, led by a legendary stallion locals called Phantom, a magnificent dappled gray with a flowing silver mane, had developed an almost mythical status among the rangers, estimated to be around 12 years old. Phantom had evaded close human contact despite numerous attempts to document his herd. Some claimed the stallion possessed an uncanny intelligence, leading his band away from potential threats with strategic precision. Jason's radio crackled with static as he guided his ATV up a narrow ridge trail. Base to Meadows check-in over. He reached for the radio clip to his belt. Meadows to base, all clear in Sector 7. I'm heading to the Eastern Springs to check water levels. Should be back by 1800. Over. Copy that. Meadows. Weather Service reports possible thunderstorms developing later this afternoon. Watch your 6. Over. Will do. Meadows out. Jason glanced at the sky. A few wispy clouds dotted the otherwise clear blue expanse, giving no hint of the approaching weather system. He made a mental note to keep an eye on the horizon as he continued his patrol. After another hour of riding, he reached a rocky overlook that provided a sweeping view of the canyon below. Jason cut the ATV's engine and pulled out his binoculars, scanning the landscape methodically. The quiet was absolute. No cars, no planes overhead, no human voices. Only the occasional cry of a red-tailed hawk broke the silence. A movement in the valley below caught his attention. Through his binoculars, he spotted what he'd been hoping to find: horses, at least 15 of them, gathered around one of the natural springs that dotted the region, and there, standing slightly apart from the others, was unmistakably Phantom. Even from this distance, the stallion's powerful presence was evident. There you are, Jason whispered, a smile spreading across his face. He reached for his camera with its powerful zoom lens, eager to document the elusive herd. As he adjusted his position to get a better angle, the loose shell beneath his boot gave way. Jason felt a moment of weightlessness as he lost his footing on the treacherous overlook. His training kicked in, and he attempted to control his fall, but the slope was too steep, the rocks too unstable. He tumbled down the rocky incline, desperately trying to protect his head. A sharp pain exploded in his left leg as it twisted unnaturally between two boulders. The last thing Jason remembered was a final violent impact as his head struck a rock. And then darkness claimed him in the valley below. Phantom's head jerked up, ears pricked forward at the sound of falling rocks. The stallion's nostrils flared, testing the air for danger. The other horses in the herd tensed, ready to flee at their leader's signal, but instead of leading them away, Phantom took several cautious steps toward the source of the disturbance. His powerful muscles tense under his gray coat. What he would discover there would set in motion an extraordinary chain of events that no one could have predicted. The sun had shifted position in the sky when consciousness began to return to Jason. In painful waves, the world swam in and out of focus as he struggled to orient himself. He was lying on his back, the hard ground beneath him, and an intense, throbbing pain radiated from his left leg and head. His mouth was dry as desert sand, and when he attempted to move, white-hot agony shot through his body. "Help!" He tried to call out, but his voice emerged as a hoarse whisper that didn't carry beyond his immediate surroundings. His radio lay shattered several feet away, crushed during his fall. As Jason's vision gradually cleared, he became aware of something extraordinary. Standing in a loose semicircle around him were several horses, wild mustangs from the herd he'd been observing. Their ears were pricked forward in curiosity, their eyes fixed on the injured human before them. Jason blinked, certain he must be hallucinating. Wild horses typically avoided humans at all costs, particularly when a person was conscious and capable of movement, yet here they stood, 7 or 8 of them, maintaining a respectful distance but showing no signs of fear or aggression. And there, at the center of the group, stood Phantom himself. The magnificent stallion was even more impressive up close. His dappled gray coat caught the sunlight, and his silver mane moved gently in the breeze. His intelligent eyes seemed to assess Jason's condition with almost human comprehension. "This can't be real," Jason whispered. He tried again to move, to reach for the emergency kit strapped to his belt, but the movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body. A quick self-assessment told him his situation was dire. His left leg was almost certainly broken, possibly in multiple places. The sticky wetness at the back of his head suggested a serious head wound without water or medical attention in this remote area. With temperatures soon to drop as evening approached, his chances of survival were slim. As if sensing his desperation, one of the horses, a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face, took several steps closer. Jason held perfectly still, aware that any sudden movement might spook the animal. The mare lowered her head, her breath warm against his face, as she sniffed him curiously. To Jason's astonishment, the mare then turned and trotted to a small depression about 15 feet away, where a tiny pool of water had collected from a natural spring. She dipped her muzzle in the water, then returned to Jason's side. Water dripped from her lips onto his face and parched mouth. "Are you helping me?" Jason whispered in disbelief. The behavior was so far outside normal wild horse conduct that Jason wondered again if he was hallucinating from his head injury, yet the water was real cool against his cracked lips. The mare repeated this action several times, bringing him precious moisture that helped clear his mind. Meanwhile, Phantom maintained his position, standing like a sentinel between Jason and the path that led down into the canyon. Occasionally the stallion would raise his head, nostrils flaring as he scented the air before resuming his watchful stance. As the shadows lengthened and the first hints of evening approached, Jason realized with growing dread that he hadn't checked in with base at his scheduled time. Search parties wouldn't be organized until he was significantly overdue, which might not be until morning. The prospect of spending a night injured in the wilderness, with temperatures dropping and predators emerging, filled him with fear. Yet the horses showed no signs of leaving. In fact, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, more of the herd appeared, forming an expanded circle around the injured ranger. Their behavior defied explanation. Wild horses simply didn't form protective circles around injured humans. Among the newcomers was a young colt, perhaps only a few months old, with gangly legs and a curious disposition. Under the watchful eye of what appeared to be his mother, the colt approached Jason more closely than any of the others had dared. With the innocent boldness of youth, he sniffed at Jason's uniform, nudging gently at the pockets. The movement caused Jason to remember the emergency whistle attached to his belt. If he could reach it, perhaps its shrill sound would carry far enough to alert anyone who might be searching for him. Already, with excruciating effort, fighting through waves of pain, Jason managed to move his hand to his belt and grasp the whistle, but his victory was short-lived. His fingers, numb from shock and the beginnings of exposure, couldn't maintain their grip. The whistle fell to the ground just beyond his reach. Jason let out a groan of frustration and despair. What happened next would change everything Jason thought he knew about these wild creatures. The young colt spotted the fallen whistle, his curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar object. Under the watchful gaze of the entire herd, he stretched his muzzle toward it, sniffing cautiously before gently nudging it with his nose. The whistle moved a few inches, glinting in the late afternoon sun. "Please," Jason whispered, not daring to hope that his desperate thoughts could somehow be communicated to the wild animal. The colt picked up the whistle between his lips, apparently intrigued by its metallic taste or unusual shape. For A heart-topping moment. Jason feared the young horse would trot away with it or drop it even further from reach instead. Whether by accident or design, the colt released the whistle directly onto Jason's chest with trembling fingers. Jason grasped the whistle and raised it to his lips. He blew 3 short blasts, followed by 3 long, then 3 short. Again the universal SOS signal. The shrill sound echoed across the canyon, causing several of the horses to step back, ears flattened against the unexpected noise, but remarkably they didn't flee. Jason repeated the distress call every few minutes, hoping against hope that someone might hear it. Between signals he noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The predicted thunderstorm was approaching, and being exposed on this hillside during a lightning storm would only compound his already dire situation, as if confirming his fears. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the landscape. The horses shifted nervously, and Phantom raised his head, sensing the changing air. Jason expected the herd to depart immediately, seeking shelter before the storm hit. Instead, the dappled gray stallion did something astonishing. Phantom approached Jason directly, coming close enough that the ranger could see the individual hairs of his silver mane. With deliberate movements, the stallion lowered himself to the ground beside Jason, his large body creating a windbreak against the gusting air that preceded the storm. One by one, several other horses from the herd followed their leader's example, lying down in a loose circle around the injured man. "This is impossible," Jason murmured, yet the evidence was undeniable. The chestnut mare who had brought him water earlier positioned herself on his other side, her body heat providing welcome warmth. As the temperature began to drop with the approaching storm, the young colt settled near his feet, while others formed an outer circle, some standing, some lying down. Jason had studied wild horse behavior for years and had never heard of such a phenomenon. Wild mustangs simply didn't cluster protectively around humans, especially not during threatening weather when their instincts should be driving them to seek shelter. The first fat raindrops began to fall as the storm reached them. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the crack of thunder. Jason winced, bracing for the horses to panic and flee. Instead, they pressed closer, their bodies shielding him from the worst of the elements. Phantom remained steadfast at his side, occasionally turning his head to check on the injured ranger. The rain intensified, but the worst of the downpour seemed to be deflected by the living shelter the horses had created. Jason's ranger training told him that the body heat of the animals might be the only thing preventing him from developing hypothermia, as the cold rain soaked through his clothing as darkness fell completely. Jason's hope of immediate rescue dimmed. Search parties rarely continued after nightfall in such dangerous terrain. He would need to survive until morning, injured and exposed to the elements, yet the extraordinary behavior of the mustangs gave him a chance he wouldn't otherwise have had. Throughout the night, as the storm raged and then gradually passed, the horses maintained their protective formation. Occasionally one would rise, stretch, and be replaced by another, but they never left him alone or exposed. In his moments of lucidity between pain and exhaustion, Jason wondered what had prompted such behavior in creatures known for their weariness around humans during the darkest hours. When pain threatened to overwhelm him, Jason found himself talking softly to Phantom, whose large, intelligent eyes seemed to watch him with uncanny understanding. "Why are you helping me?" he whispered to the stallion. "What made you decide I was worth saving?" Of course, there was no answer beyond the gentle nickering sounds the horses made to each other as they shifted positions, yet their presence provided not just physical protection but an unexpected emotional comfort. Jason had never felt such a profound connection to the wild creatures he'd spent his career studying and protecting. As the first faint glow of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Jason heard something that sent a surge of hope through his pain-racked body, the distant but distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoing across the canyon. The helicopter's searchlight cut through the lingering pre-dawn darkness, sweeping methodically across the rugged terrain. Inside the aircraft, search and rescue coordinator Sarah Chun scanned the landscape below, her experienced eyes searching for any sign of the missing ranger. "There's a lot of ground to cover," she spoke into her headset to the pilot. "Last GPS ping from his vehicle puts him somewhere in this 5 m radius, but that's still a massive search area." The pilot nodded grimly. "Fuel gives us about 40 minutes on station before we need to head back and refuel below." Jason heard the helicopter but couldn't see it. Through the ceiling of low clouds left by the night storm, the sound would fade and then grow stronger as the aircraft changed direction in its search pattern he knew they could easily miss. Him in the vast wilderness? I need to signal them, he said aloud, his voice. From thirst, despite the water the chestnut mare had brought him through the night, the horses had grown restless. At the unfamiliar sound of the helicopter, Phantom stood at alert, his ears pricked, forward muscles tense as he assessed this new potential threat. Several of the herd had already retreated a short distance up the slope. Jason fumbled for his whistle again, but feared its sound would be useless against the roar of the helicopter's engines. He needed something more visible. Something that would catch the attention of the searchers above the cloud ceiling. With painful effort, he reached for the emergency foil blanket in his belt pouch. If he could spread it out, its reflective surface might catch the helicopter searchlight, but his injured state made even this simple task nearly impossible. The blanket unfurled only partially. Much of it still crumpled beside him. What happened next defied explanation. The young colt who had helped with the whistle approached the shiny material. Clearly fascinated by its unusual appearance, he gently took a corner of the blanket in his mouth and, whether by accident or design, began walking backward, pulling the material open as he went. That's it, Jason encouraged, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. The colt's mother, the chestnut mare, approached from the other side and did the same with another corner, effectively spreading the reflective blanket across the ground beside Jason. Other horses moved away from the shiny material, creating an open space that would be more visible from above. Phantom, meanwhile, had moved to higher ground. The stallion reared suddenly, pawing at the air before coming down with a resounding stomp that sent small rocks tumbling down the slope. He repeated this behavior several times, moving back and forth along the ridge in the helicopter. Sarah suddenly leaned forward, pointing their movement on that western ridge. It looks like horses. The pilot adjusted course, bringing them closer to the area she'd indicated. Wild mustangs, Sarah confirmed through her binoculars, but they are behaving strangely. Wait, is that something reflective on the ground near them? She directed the pilot to hover closer as she trained the searchlight directly on the spot. The beam caught the foil blanket, creating a brilliant flash of reflected light through the thinning cloud cover. There, Sarah exclaimed. That's got to be him. I can see a person on the ground. The horses scattered as the helicopter descended to a clearer position, all except Phantom, who stood his ground on the ridge, as if making sure the rescuers had indeed spotted Jason before finally retreating to join his herd at a safer distance. As the helicopter touched down in the clearest spot available, Sarah and a paramedic named Mike jumped out and rushed to Jason's side. They found him conscious but badly injured, his left leg clearly broken and a serious laceration on the back of his head. Jason, can you hear me? Sarah called as Mike began assessing his vitals. The horses, Jason managed weakly. They stayed with me, they protected me all night. Sarah exchanged a puzzled glance with Mike, assuming Jason was delirious from his injuries and exposure. Don't worry about the horses, we're going to get you out of here. No, you don't understand, Jason insisted as they carefully transferred him to a backboard. They formed a circle around me during the storm. They brought me water. The fool helped with the whistle in the blanket. They saved my life. Mike secured a cervical collar around Jason's neck. He's got a significant head injury and probable hypothermia. Confusion is expected, but as they lifted him toward the helicopter, Jason caught a glimpse of the herd watching from a safe distance. Phantom stood at the forefront, his silver mane catching the first true rays of morning sunlight. They're still there, Jason pointed weakly. Look at them, they're making sure I'm safe. Sarah paused long enough to follow his gaze. What she saw made her breath catch. A line of wild mustangs standing sentinel on the ridge, watching the rescue operation with what could only be described as intentional focus. That's unusual behavior for wild horses, she admitted, her scientific mind struggling to find a rational explanation. As they loaded Jason into the helicopter, the truth of what had happened during those long hours on the mountainside remained known only to the injured ranger and the wild creatures who had defied their nature to protect him, but the evidence of their extraordinary intervention would soon become impossible to dismiss. 3 weeks later, Jason sat in a wheelchair on the porch of the ranger station, his left leg encased in a heavy cast, a healing scar hidden beneath his hair where doctors had closed the wound on his head. The medical team had been blunt About his close call without warmth and some protection from the elements during that stormy night he likely wouldn't have survived until morning. "How are you feeling today?" asked Director Martinez, the regional supervisor who had flown in specifically to debrief Jason about his experience. "Better," Jason replied, gesturing to his healing injuries. "Doctors say I can start physical therapy next week." Martinez nodded then, placed a folder on the table between them. "I've reviewed your incident report. It's quite something." Jason recognized the director's diplomatic tone. "You don't believe me about the horses?" "I didn't say that," Martinez replied carefully. "Your account is just unprecedented. Wild mustangs forming a protective circle around a human, bringing water, helping with signals. There's no documented case of such behavior." "I know how it sounds," Jason admitted. "If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it either." Martinez leaned forward. "The search team did confirm seeing a band of mustangs near you during the rescue, which is unusual in itself. They normally flee from helicopters." "It was phantoms," heard Jason confirmed. "The stallion everyone's been trying to document for years." "Yes, about that." Martinez pulled several photographs from the folder. "The rescue team's body cams captured some images of the horses before they retreated." Jason accepted the photos, his heart racing as he saw clear images of Phantom and several members of his herd. The dappled gray stallion looked even more magnificent than he remembered. "These are the first clear photographs we've ever obtained of this particular stallion," Martinez continued. "But what's really interesting is this." He produced another photo, this one a close-up of Phantom's left flank. Just visible through his gray coat was a distinctive mark, a freeze brand partially overgrown with hair but still recognizable to those who knew what to look for. "He was part of a release program," Martinez explained. "According to our records, he was born in captivity, trained with positive reinforcement methods as part of a behavioral study, and released into the wild 12 years ago." Jason stared at the brand, understanding dawning. He wasn't just a wild stallion, he had human contact during his formative period. "Exactly. The program was designed to see if horses with positive early human experiences might form less antagonistic relationships with humans after release." "Most of the subjects simply integrated into wild herds and showed no special affinity for humans in subsequent encounters, except Phantom," Jason murmured. "Perhaps," Martinez conceded, "though that still doesn't explain the behavior of the other horses who hadn't been part of any program." Jason thought about the chestnut mare who had brought him water, the curious Colt who had helped with the whistle and blanket. They were following his lead. Horses are hierarchical. If the herd leader accepted me as something to protect rather than fear, they would follow his example." Martinez didn't look entirely convinced but nodded respectfully. "Your experience has raised some fascinating questions about Mustang cognition and behavior. We'd like to set up a more formal study in the area with your input, of course." After the director left, Jason wheeled himself to the edge of the station's property, where the land sloped gently down toward the canyon. In the distance somewhere out there, Phantom and his herd continued their wild existence, free and untamed despite the stallion's early history with humans. Jason had requested to be part of any new research initiatives in the area. Once he recovered, he felt a connection to these animals that went beyond scientific interest. They had saved his life through actions that defied conventional understanding of wild horse behavior. As the sun began to set over the Nevada landscape, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain, Jason thought he spotted movement on a distant ridge, several equine silhouettes outlined against the golden sky. Though too far to identify with certainty, he allowed himself to believe it was Phantom's herd still watching over this human whose life had become unexpectedly intertwined with theirs. The bond formed in those desperate hours on the mountainside had changed Jason forever, and perhaps in some ways science couldn't yet measure. It had changed the horses too. 6 months had passed since Jason's near-fatal accident. His physical recovery had progressed better than doctors initially predicted, though he still walked with a slight limp that might always remain with him. Today marked his first solo patrol since returning to active duty, a milestone he'd been anticipating for weeks. He guided his ATV slowly along familiar trails, appreciating the landscape with new eyes. Every ridge and canyon now held memories not just of pain and fear but of extraordinary connection and unexpected rescue. Jason had a specific destination in mind. The research team had installed several wildlife cameras in the area where Phantom's herd was known to frequent, hoping to document more instances of their unusual behavior as the field ranger assigned to the project. Jason was responsible for maintaining the equipment and retrieving the data cards. He reached the first camera station and carefully removed the weatherproof casing to access the memory card. According to the logs, this particular camera had captured over 300 images in the past month. Most would likely be triggered by wind, small animals, or other mundane movements, but occasionally they captured clear images of the Mustangs. The next camera was located near the natural spring where Jason had first spotted the herd before his fall. As he approached the site, he cut the ATV's engine and proceeded on foot, moving quietly to avoid disturbing any wildlife that might be present. The spring sparkled in the afternoon sun, its clear water creating a small oasis in the otherwise arid landscape. Jason knelt beside it, memories flooding back of the chestnut mare who had brought water to his parched lips. In similar fashion, he dipped his hand into the cool liquid, grateful in a way that went beyond simple thirst. A sudden nickering sound made him freeze. Slowly, Jason turned to see a lone horse watching him from about 50 yards away. The chestnut mare, with a distinctive white blaze down her face, she stood perfectly still, ears pricked forward in his direction. "Hello, girl," Jason said softly, remaining in his crouched position to appear less threatening. The mare took several steps toward him, then stopped, her nostrils flaring as she tested his scent on the breeze. Jason held his breath, hardly daring to hope for a closer encounter. Wild Mustangs, even those who had exhibited unusual behavior in the past, typically maintained a significant distance from humans. To his amazement, the mare approached to within 20 feet. Before stopping again, she tossed her head and paw at the ground, once behaviors Jason recognized as signs of mild anxiety but not fear. "I remember you," he told her quietly. "You helped save my life." The mare's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. She took a few more cautious steps forward, close enough now that Jason could see the individual whiskers on her muzzle and the depth of intelligence in her brown eyes. A movement beyond the mare caught Jason's attention. From behind a stand of juniper trees emerged Phantom himself, his dappled gray coat unmistakable even at a distance. The stallion approached with the confident stride of a herd leader, moving to stand beside the chestnut mare. Jason remained motionless, scarcely believing his good fortune. In 8 years of ranging this territory, he had never been this close to the legendary stallion. While on foot, the horse's freeze brand was visible now, confirming his identity as one of the program horses released years ago. "Hello, Phantom," Jason greeted him, keeping his voice low and gentle. The stallion's ears swiveled toward the sound, his intelligent eyes fixed on Jason with an intensity that seemed to communicate recognition. After a moment's assessment, Phantom lowered his head slightly and took several steps closer, bringing him to almost the same distance as the chestnut mare. Jason slowly, carefully reached into his pocket and withdrew an apple he'd packed for his lunch. Moving with deliberate gentleness, he extended his hand, the fruit resting on his open palm. He had no real expectation that these wild animals would take food from his hand. He merely wanted to make the offering as a token of gratitude. The chestnut mare nickered softly to Phantom, as if conferring about this development. Then, to Jason's astonishment, the stallion approached closer, still stretching his neck to sniff the offered apple with delicate precision that belied his size and strength. Phantom took the fruit from Jason's palm, his lips velvety against the ranger's skin. For the briefest moment, as the stallion crunched the apple, the mare moved forward, as well nudging Jason's shoulder gently with her muzzle. The gesture seemed almost like a greeting between old friends, though Jason knew better than to anthropomorphize too much. Still, the behavior was remarkable for truly wild horses. "The researchers won't believe this," Jason murmured, wishing he had thought to set up his camera before approaching the spring. As if responding to his words, Phantom finished the apple and gave a soft whicker. From beyond the junipers, more horses appeared, the young colt now significantly grown, and several others Jason recognized from that fateful night. They approached more cautiously than their leaders, forming a loose semicircle several yards back. For nearly 20 minutes, this extraordinary interaction continued. The horses maintained their proximity, occasionally approaching to sniff Jason's clothing or equipment before retreating a comfortable Distance none showed signs of fear, only a cautious curiosity that defied typical wild Mustang behavior. Eventually Phantom raised his head and gave a soft, nickering call. The herd responded immediately, turning to follow as he led them away from the spring and up toward the higher ridges. The chestnut mare was the last to leave, lingering a moment longer as if to ensure Jason was truly recovered and well. 2 years after his remarkable rescue, Jason stood before a small audience at the National Wildlife Conservation Conference in Denver. On the screen behind him was a series of photographs documenting what had become known in research circles as the Phantom phenomenon, the unprecedented behavior of a wild Mustang herd toward an injured human. What we've documented over the past 24 months fundamentally challenges our understanding of wild horse cognition and behavior, Jason explained to the attentive audience of researchers and wildlife advocates. The herd not only provided protection during the initial incident but has continued to display untypical tolerance during subsequent encounters. He clicked to the next slide. A remarkable image captured 6 months earlier by one of the research cameras. It showed Phantom and several members of his herd gathered around a salt lick that researchers had placed near a wildlife camera standing among them. Completely accepted within the herd space was Jason. This wasn't a staged encounter, he continued. I had approached to check the camera equipment and found the herd already present instead of fleeing as wild Mustangs typically would. They allowed me to remain in their presence for over 40 minutes. Dr. Eleanor Winters, a renowned echo and behavior specialist from Cornell University, raised her hand. You've suggested in your paper that this behavior stems from Phantom's early experiences in the training program, but that doesn't explain why the entire herd exhibits similar tolerance. Jason nodded, having anticipated this question. We believe it's a combination of factors. Yes, Phantom's early positive experiences with humans likely created a foundation, but equally important is the social learning aspect. Horses are highly social animals that take behavioral cues from their herd leaders. When Phantom initially approached me during the rescue, the others followed his lead. He clicked to another slide showing the chestnut mare bringing water to an injured hiker who had been part of a controlled study. What's most remarkable is that the behavior has generalized. The herd now appears to recognize when humans are in distress and has shown similar helpful behaviors in 3 documented cases since my accident. After the presentation, as attendees filed out of the auditorium, Dr. Winters approached Jason privately. Your research is compelling, Ranger Meadows, but I'm curious about something not covered in your formal presentation. What's that? Jason asked. How has this experience changed you, not as a researcher but as a person? Jason considered the question carefully. It's made me reconsider the boundaries we create between humans and wildlife. We tend to view ourselves as separate from and superior to the natural world, but when I was lying injured on that hillside, those distinctions disappeared. I wasn't a ranger or a human. I was simply another being in need of help, and they responded not as wild horses but as sentient creatures capable of compassion. Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that's the most important finding of all. 1 week later, Jason returned to his patrol duties in High Rock Canyon. The research program continued with cameras documenting the herd's movements and behaviors, but Jason had insisted on maintaining strict protocols to ensure the Mustangs remained truly wild. There would be no attempts to habituate them further, no regular feeding or interference with their natural patterns. As he guided his ATV along a ridge trail, Jason spotted movement in the valley below. Through his binoculars, he could see Phantom's herd grazing peacefully in the late afternoon sun. Among them were several new foss, the next generation of this remarkable band of horses. Jason cut his engine and simply watched them for a while, appreciating their wild grace. The chestnut mare appeared to be pregnant again, her side slightly rounded with the promise of new life. The once young colt who had helped with the emergency whistle was now a handsome 2-year-old, beginning to show the confident bearing of his sire. As Jason prepared to continue his patrol, Phantom suddenly raised his head, nostrils flaring as he caught the rare scent on the breeze. The stallion looked directly toward Jason's position on the ridge, then did something remarkable. He reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves pawing at the air in what appeared to be a deliberate greeting. Rather than a warning, several members of the herd turned to look up at the ridge as well. Acknowledging the human observer in their midst, there was no fear in their posture. Only a calm recognition of a presence that had somehow become woven into the fabric of their wild lives in that moment. Jason understood that he had become part of something extraordinary. Not just a scientific discovery or a remarkable rescue story, but a living example of how the boundaries between humans and wild animals could be redefined through trust and mutual respect. The Bureau of Land Management had recently designated this region as a special management area specifically for studying the unique behaviors of phantoms. The research had implications not just for Mustang conservation but for our broader understanding of animal cognition. If the story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We share inspiring animal stories every week that will change how you see the world. Leave a comment below, sharing what moved you most, and help us reach even more animal lovers by sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it.